It is the sense of majesty and beauty and repose, a blended holiness of earth and sky. Something that makes this individual spot, this small abiding place of many men, a termination and a last retreat, a center come from wheresoe'er you will, a whole without dependence or defect, made for itself and happy in itself. Perfect contentment, unity entire.
In the early years of the 19th century, a poet at the height of his powers pays tribute to his chosen dwelling place, the Vale of Grasmere in the English Lake District. Now, almost 2 centuries later, people from all over the world come here to visit the home of the first and the greatest of the nature poets, William Wordsworth. And to a very large extent, the mountains, lakes, valleys and farms that they see are still as Wordsworth saw them. The coming of the motor car and the sheer numbers of visitors have robbed the more popular places of their tranquility. But in the heights and away from the beaten track, the majesty and beauty and repose are still there for those who seek them. The survival of the English Lake District, relatively intact into the closing years of the 20th century, has been no accident. Most of Cumbria is a designated national park. The National Trust acquired its first piece of land here and now has almost 100,000 acres under its care. Local and regional planners ensure that new developments are in keeping with traditional local architecture. National Trust, National Park, two bodies whose very titles echo exactly the principles expressed by Wordsworth addressing future property owners in his widely read Guide to the Lakes 150 years ago.
It is then much to be wished that a better taste should prevail among these new proprietors, and, as they cannot be expected to leave things to themselves, that skill and knowledge should prevent unnecessary deviations from that path of simplicity and beauty along which, without design and unconsciously, their humble predecessors have moved. In this wish, the author will be joined by persons of pure taste throughout the whole island, who, by their visits, often repeated, to the lakes in the north of England, testify that they deem the district a sort of national property, in which every man has a right and interest, who has an eye to perceive and a heart to enjoy.
William Wordsworth was born in this house on the 7th of April 1770, the second son of John Wordsworth, attorney and law agent, and his wife Anne. With 2 other brothers and his sister Dorothy, young William spent a happy childhood here by his beloved river Derwent, wandering in the fields and playing in the ruins of Cockermouth Castle, all against the matchless backcloth of the nearby Skiddaw range of mountains. All children that developed something more profound and intense. Instead of acceptance, there was wonder. Instead of a growing indifference, there was a deepening love. It was to last him all his life, and was the inspiration of all his best poetry.
My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began. So is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each with natural piety.
Wordsworth's lifelong passion for rivers, especially for the watercourses of his native region, began with his childhood companion, the Derwent.
Behind my father's house he passed close by, along the margin of our terrace walk. He was a playmate whom we dearly loved.
In 1778, Mrs. Wordsworth died, and at the age of 8, William underwent a dramatic and important change to his life. He was sent with his brothers to the grammar school in the flourishing market town of Hawkshead, a few miles to the west of Windermere. Here, for almost 10 years, the school, which had a fine scholastic tradition, fed Wordsworth's eager young mind, and the widow Anne Tyson provided the love and warmth of a real home at her cottage in the town. William did well at the school. His gift for poetry was encouraged by the headmaster, Henry Taylor, but Wordsworth was not the typical poetic youth, alone and palely loitering. He was popular with his fellow scholars, joining in the rough games and country pastimes. Yet it was during these very boyish pursuits, such as the raiding of ravens' nests on exposed cliff faces to protect the farmers' lambs, that the boy's imagination was fired.
Oh, when I have hung above the raven's nest, by knots of grass and half-inch fissures in the slippery rock, but ill-sustained, and almost, as it seemed, suspended by the blast that blew amain, shouldering the naked crag. Oh, at that time, while on the perilous ridge I hung alone, with what strange utterance did the loud, dry wind blow through my ears? The sky seemed not a sky of earth, and with what motion moved the clouds.
There is no doubt about William Wordsworth's happiness as he grew to manhood here in the heart of the Lake District. His expeditions on foot ranged far and wide. The insatiable desire to follow any winding road and discover what lay on the other side of the hill was his in abundance, and many a day Anne Tyson didn't set eyes on her young charge from early morning until he returned exhausted after dusk.
My morning walks were early. Oft, before the hours of school, I travelled round our little lake. 5 miles of pleasant wandering. Happy time.
Our little lake was Esthwaite Water, the smallest of the English lakes, obviously a favourite haunt of the young Wordsworth, and the scene of his early skating prowess. He remained fond of skating all his life. It was during one of his schoolboy expeditions, one golden summer holiday, that Wordsworth found himself surveying the Vale of Grasmere from a vantage point high on Loughrig Fell.
At sight of this seclusion, he forgot his haste, for hasty had his footsteps been, as boyish his pursuits, and sighing said, "What happy fortune were it here to live!" And if a thought of dying, if a thought of mortal separation could intrude, with paradise before him, here to die.
But the penniless boy was more of a prophet than he thought. The Vale of Grasmere was to be his home for 50 years of his life, but not yet. William was destined to go up to St. John's College, Cambridge. So the time came when he had to turn his back on everything he loved: home, school, friends, hills, and lakes.
Dear native regions, I foretell, from what I feel at this farewell, that wheresoe'er my steps may tend, and whensoe'er my course shall end, if in that hour a single tie survive of local sympathy, my soul will cast the backward view, the longing look alone on you. Thus, while the sun sinks down to rest, far in the regions of the west, though to the vale no parting beam be given, not one memorial gleam, a lingering light he fondly throws on the dear hills where first he rose.
After a nomadic decade on the continent and in the south of England, William, now reunited with his sister Dorothy, came to live at Windy Brow on the lower slopes of Latrig near Keswick. The visit proved to be a turning point in Wordsworth's life. Desperately short of money, William could see no way of supporting himself as a poet and had thought of turning to journalism to earn a living. Young Raisley Calvert admired both the man and his work, and a strong bond of friendship sprang up between the two. But Raisley was dying of consumption, and Wordsworth stayed on at Keswick to look after him until he died early the next year. In his will, Raisley Calvert bequeathed to William Wordsworth the sum of £900, an act of faith in the young poet's genius, and enough to ensure for him a modest independence. Like many other milestones in Wordsworth's young life, Raisley's generosity was remembered in the great autobiographical poem, The Prelude.
Himself no poet, yet far less a common spirit of the world, he deemed that my pursuits and labours lay apart from all that leads to wealth, or even perhaps to necessary maintenance, without some hazard to the finer sense. He cleared a passage for me, and the stream flowed in the bent of nature.
The name Calvert and that same spirit of generosity live on today at Old Windy Brow. It's a riding school, part of the Calvert Trust, an organisation dedicated to providing activity holidays for disabled people.
And now 'tis mine, perchance for life, dear vale, beloved Grasmere. Let the wandering streams take up, the cloud-capped hills repeat the name. One of thy lowly dwellings is my home.
In the final month of the 18th century, William and Dorothy settled in the very spot that had so impressed the wandering schoolboy almost 20 years before. Their new home was at Town End on the outskirts of Grasmere village. Raisley Calvert's £900 had enabled them to take the lease at a rent of £8 per annum.
Christmas Eve, Grasmere, 1799. My dearest Coleridge, we arrived here last Friday, and have now been 4 days in our new abode. Dorothy is much pleased with the house and appurtenances, the orchard especially. In imagination, she's already built a seat with a summer shed on the highest platform, in this, our little domestic slip of mountain. The spot commands a view over the roof of our house, of the lake, the church, Helm Crag, and 2/3 of the vale.
Wordsworth's sheer joy at finding himself in such an earthly paradise burst out of him in some of his finest and most accessible poetry.
Embrace me then, ye hills, and close me in. Now in the clear and open day I feel your guardianship. I take it to my heart. 'Tis like the solemn shelter of the night. But I would call thee beautiful, for mild and soft and gay and beautiful thou art. Dear valley, having in thy face a smile, though peaceful, full of gladness.
Immediately, William, Dorothy and their friends, particularly Coleridge and the Hutchinson sisters, began to explore every corner of Grasmere Vale. In a very real sense, they made it their own, in that they became very fond of naming favourite spots in the area after each other. These little ceremonies were usually commemorated in turn by a poem from William. A little dell in Easdale became a regular haunt. William named it Emma's Dell after his sister, who appears in this verse as Emma, his pet name for Dorothy.
Green leaves were here, but 'twas the foliage of the rocks, the birch, the yew, the holly, and the bright green thorn, with hanging islands of resplendent firs. And on a summit, distant a short space, by any who should look beyond the dell, a single mountain cottage might be seen. I gazed, and to myself I said, our thoughts at least are ours, and this wild nook, my Emma, I will dedicate to thee.
To the north of Grasmere, on the side of Great Rig Man in the Fairfield Range, is the rocky outcrop known as Stone Arthur. But to Dorothy Wordsworth, watching the rays of the sun illuminate its face, it became a towering symbol of the person she loved more than anyone on earth, her brother.
'Tis in truth the loneliest place we have among the clouds, and she who dwells with me, whom I have loved with such communion that no place on earth can ever be a solitude to me, hath to this lonely summit given my name.
Some of these places are less easy to recognize. 3 years before they married, William and his bride-to-be, Mary Hutchinson, came across a small pond deep in a green glade far from any path, and were struck by its simple beauty.
The travellers know it not, and 'twill remain unknown to them. but it is beautiful. And if a man should plant his cottage near, should sleep beneath the shelter of its trees, and blend its waters with his daily meal, he would so love it, that in his death hour its image would survive among his thoughts. And therefore, my sweet Mary, this still nook, with all its beeches, we have named for you.
William and Mary were married in October 1802, and the Grasmere idyll continued, with Dorothy treating as a sister her old friend and well-loved companion, Mary. For almost the whole of that first decade of the 19th century, the house now known as Dove Cottage was a centre of contentment, friendship, and prodigious industry, as the family grew with the arrival of William's children to cherish. The Coleridge family and the other Wordsworth brothers were regular visitors, staying for weeks or months at a time. With his sister and with friends, enormous walking tours were undertaken, inspiring in William a vast outpouring of poetry. A walk along the shore of Ullswater with Dorothy one windy April day produced a poem whose first lines at least are familiar to almost everyone who speaks the English language.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretch in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils.
It was a magic time, a time of William's greatest happiness. Lakeland became for him a kind of paradise in which the poet could look at the world in the spirit of love.
What want we? Have we not perpetual streams, warm woods and sunny hills, and fresh green fields, and mountains not less green, and flocks, land herds, and thickets full of songsters, and the voice of loudly birds, and unexpected sound heard now and then from morn till latest eve, admonishing the man who walks below of solitude and the silence in the sky? These have we, but nowhere else is found the one sensation that is here.
By 1808, Dove Cottage was impossibly overcrowded. The whole Wordsworth entourage, reluctant to leave the Vale of Grasmere, moved to Allen Bank, a newly built house on the north side of the lake, within sight of Dove Cottage. They found it impossible to keep warm, and later moved to the old vicarage, which was equally unsatisfactory, and where two of the Wordsworth's children, Catherine and Thomas, died in infancy. In 1813, Wordsworth's life moved into another phase. He was appointed distributor of stamps for Westmoreland, a sinecure which enhanced further his financial independence, and during that same year, the family moved to Rydal Mount, some 2 miles along the Ambleside Road from Dove Cottage. Here, Wordsworth was to spend the last 37 years of his life. And it was here that William wrote most of his Guide to the Lakes, which became so popular for a time that it eclipsed his reputation as a poet. The 5th and final edition of the Guide, still being reprinted, begins with a firm statement of intention.
In preparing this manual, it was the author's principal wish to furnish a guide or companion for the minds of persons of taste and feeling for landscape, who might be inclined to explore the district of the lakes with that degree of attention to which its beauty may fairly lay claim.
Wordsworth suggests to the reader a theoretical starting point for the exploration. To begin then with the main outlines of the country. I know not how to give the reader a distinct image of these more readily than by requesting him to place himself with me in imagination upon some given point. Let it be the top of either of the mountains, Great Gable or Scaw Fell. Or rather, let us suppose our station to be a cloud hanging midway between those two mountains and not many yards above their highest elevation. We shall then see stretched at our feet a number of valleys, not fewer than 8, diverging from the point on which we are supposed to stand, like the spokes from the nave of a wheel. There is, in the several ridges that enclose these vales and divide them from each other, I mean in the forms and surfaces, first of the swelling grounds, next of the hills and rocks, and lastly of the mountains, an ascent of almost regular gradation, from elegance and richness to their highest point of grandeur and sublimity. I do not indeed know any tract of country in which, within so narrow a compass, may be found an equal variety in the influences of light and shadow upon the sublime or beautiful features of landscape.
Were there below a spot of holy ground, where from distress a refuge might be found, and solitude prepare the soul for heaven, sure, nature's God that spot to man had given, where falls the purple morning far and wide in flakes of light upon the mountain side, where with loud voice the power of water shakes the leafy wood, or sleeps in quiet lakes.
But to proceed with our survey, and first of the mountains. Their forms are endlessly diversified, sweeping easily or boldly in simple majesty, abrupt and precipitous, or soft and elegant. In the combinations which they make, towering above each other or lifting themselves in ridges like the waves of a tumultuous sea, and in the beauty and variety of their surfaces and colors, they are surpassed by none. The general surface of the mountains is turf, rendered rich and green by the moisture of the climate. Sometimes the turf is little broken, the whole covering being soft and downy pasturage. In other places, rocks predominate. The soil is laid bare by torrents and burstings of water from the sides of the mountains in heavy rains, and not infrequently their perpendicular sides are seamed by ravines, formed also by rains and torrents, which, meeting in angular points, entrench and scar the surface with numerous figures like the letters W and Y.
Inmate of a mountain dwelling, thou hast clomb aloft and gazed from the watchtowers of Helvellyn, awed, delighted, and amazed. Lo, dwindled woods and meadows, what a vast abyss is there! Lo, the clouds, the solemn shadows, and the glistenings, heavenly fair.
When, in the heat of advancing summer, the fresh green tint of the herbage has somewhat faded, it is again revived by the appearance of the fern, profusely spread over the same ground. And upon this plant, more than upon anything else, do the changes which the seasons make in the colouring of the mountains depend. About the first week in October, the rich green which prevailed through the whole summer is usually passed away. The brilliant and varied colours of the fern are then in harmony with the autumnal woods. Bright yellow or lemon colour at the base of the mountains, melting gradually through orange to a dark russet brown towards the summit.
'Twas autumn, and a clear and placid day, with warmth as much as needed, from a sun 2 hours decline towards the west. A day with silver clouds and sunshine on the grass, and in the sheltered and the sheltering grove, a perfect stillness.
I will take this opportunity of observing that they who have studied the appearances of nature feel that the superiority in point of visual interest of mountainous over other countries is more strikingly displayed in winter than in summer. This, as must be obvious, is partly owing to the forms of the mountains, which of course are not affected by the seasons, but also in no small degree to the greater variety that exists in their winter than in their summer colouring. This variety is such and so harmoniously preserved that it leaves little cause of regret when the splendour of autumn is passed away. mosses and lichens are never so fresh and flourishing as in winter, if it be not a season of frost, and their minute beauties prodigally adorn the foreground. Wherever we turn, we find these productions of nature, to which winter is rather favourable than unkindly, scattered over the walls, banks of earth, rocks and stones. Their forms and colours are a source of inexhaustible admiration.
Lone flower, hemmed in with snows, and white as they, but hardier far. Once more I see thee bend thy forehead, as if fearful to offend, like an unbidden guest. Though day by day storms, sallying forth from the mountain tops, waylay the rising sun, and on the plains descend, yet art thou welcome, welcome as a friend whose zeal outruns his promise. Blue-eyed May shall soon behold this border thickly set with bright jonquils, their odours lavishing on the soft west wind and his frolic peers. Nor will I then thy modest grace forget, chaste snowdrop, venturous harbinger of spring, and pensive monitor of fleeting years.
It has been said that in human life there are moments worth ages. In a more subdued tone of sympathy, may we affirm that in the climate of England there are, for the lover of nature, days which are worth whole months, I might say even years. One of these favoured days sometimes occurs in springtime, when that soft air is breathing over the blossoms and newborn verdure. The space between the middle or last week in May and the middle or last week in June may be pointed out as affording the best combination of long days, fine weather, and variety of impressions. In the deep dells, many of the spring flowers still linger, while the open and sunny places are stocked with the flowers of approaching summer.
I've watched you now a full half hour, self-poised upon that yellow flower. And, little butterfly, indeed, I know not if you sleep or feed. How motionless! Not frozen seas more motionless. And then what joy awaits you, when the breeze hath found you out among the trees, and calls you forth again.
As much the greatest number of lake tourists begin by passing from Kendal to Bowness upon Windermere, our notices shall commence with that lake. Windermere ought to be seen both from its shores and from its surface. None of the other lakes unfold so many fresh beauties to him who sails upon them. This is owing to its greater size, to the islands, and to its having two vales at the head with their accompanying mountains of nearly equal dignity. A resident in a country like this will agree with me that the presence of a lake is indispensable to exhibit in perfection the beauty of one of these days of such affecting influence. The atmosphere seems refined, and the sky rendered more crystalline. All speaks of tranquility. From this place, and from Ambleside, rides may be taken in numerous directions, and interesting walks are inexhaustible. From Ambleside, proceed to Colwith Force and up Little Langdale to Blee Tarn. The scene in which this small piece of water lies suggested to the author the following description, given in his poem of The Excursion, supposing the spectator to look down upon it not from the road, but from one of its elevated sides.
Behold, beneath our feet a little lowly vale, and yet uplifted high among the mountains, even as if the spot had been, from eldest time, by wish of theirs so placed, to be shut out from all the world.
The direct road from Ambleside to Keswick does not show to advantage Thirlmere or Withburn Lake, with its surrounding mountains. By a traveller proceeding at leisure, a deviation ought to be made from the main road when he has advanced a little beyond the 6th milestone short of Keswick, from which point there is a noble view of the Vale of Legberthwaite, with Blencathra, commonly called Saddleback, in front.
This is the spot. How mildly does the sun shine in between the fading leaves. The air in the habitual silence of this wood is more than silent, and this bed of heath, Where shall we find so sweet a resting place? Come, let me see thee sink into a dream of quiet thoughts, protracted till thine eye be calm as water when the winds are gone, and no one can tell whither.
The Vale of Keswick stretches without winding nearly north and south, from the head of Derwentwater to the foot of Bassenthwaite Lake. The form of the lake is most perfect when, like Derwentwater, it least resembles that of a river, and is contemplated with that placid and quiet feeling which belongs peculiarly to the lake, as a body of still water under the influence of no current, reflecting therefore the clouds, the light, and all the imagery of the sky and surrounding hills, expressing also and making visible the changes of the atmosphere and motions of the lightest breeze, and subject to agitation only from the winds. The best views of Keswick Lake are from Crow Park, Friars Crag, and from various points in taking the circuit of the lake. There are fine bird's-eye views from the Castle Hill, from Ashness on the road to Wat Endleth, and by following the Wat Endleth stream downwards to the Cataract of Lodore. In the Vale of Keswick, the sun sets over the humbler regions of the landscape, and showers down upon them the radiance which at once veils and glorifies, sending forth meanwhile broad streams of rosy, crimson, purple, or golden light towards the grand mountains.
The visible scene would enter unawares into his mind, with all its solemn imagery, its rocks, its woods, and that uncertain heaven received into the bosom of the steady lake.
The mountains and vale of Buttermere and Crummock are nowhere so impressive as from the bosom of Crummock Water. The scene is deep and solemn and lonely, and in no other spot is the majesty of the mountains so irresistibly felt as an omnipresence, or so passively submitted to as a spirit incumbent upon the imagination. Wasdale is well worth the notice of the traveller who is not afraid of fatigue. No part of the country is more distinguished by sublimity. Look down into the deep valley of Wasdale with its little chapel and half a dozen neat dwellings scattered upon a plain of meadow and corn ground intersected with stone walls like a large piece of lawless patchwork. Beyond this little fertile plain lies within a bed of steep mountains the long, narrow, stern and desolate lake of Wasdale. Iron is the principle of decomposition in these rocks, and hence when they become pulverized, the elementary particles crumbling down overspread in many places the steep and almost precipitous sides of the mountains with an intermixture of colors like the compound hues of a dove's neck.
Where, save the rugged road, we find no appanage of humankind, nor hint of man, if stone or rock seem not his handiwork to mock by something cognizably shaped, mockery, or model roughly hewn, and left as if by earthquake strewn, or from the flood escaped.
We will conclude with Ullswater, as being perhaps on the whole the happiest combination of beauty and grandeur which any of the lakes affords. This vale, like the others, loses much of its effect by being entered from the head, so that it is better to go from Keswick through Matterdale and descend upon Gowbarrow Park. You are thus brought at once upon a magnificent view of the two higher reaches of the lake. Ara Force thunders down the gill on the left, at a small distance from the road. Here is a powerful brook which dashes among rocks through a deep glen, hung on every side with a rich and happy mixture of native wood. There are beds of luxuriant fern, aged hawthorns, and hollies decked with honeysuckles. In order to see the lower part of the lake to advantage, it is necessary to go round by Pooley Bridge and to ride at least 3 miles along the Westmoreland side of the water towards Martindale. The views are magnificent. They who take this course of 3 or 4 miles on foot should have a boat in readiness at the end of the walk to carry them across to the Cumberland side of the lake. Poet laureate for the last 7 years of his life, William Wordsworth died at Rydal Mount on the 23rd of April, 1850. He was buried among his loved ones in the churchyard at Grasmere. More than 50 years before, he had explained his poetic vision to his friend Coleridge. It was, he said, the power of exciting the sympathy of the reader by a faithful adherence to the truth of nature, and the power of giving the interest of novelty by the modifying colours of imagination. The sudden charm which accidents of light and shade, which moonlight or sunset diffused over a known and familiar landscape, appeared to represent the practicability of combining both. These are the poetry of nature.
Yet were I destitute of all those human sentiments that make this earth so dear, if I should fail with grateful voice to speak of you, ye mountains, and ye lakes, and sounding cataracts, ye mists and winds that dwell among the hills where I was born.